Morning, morning, morning. Good morning. Good morning to you.
Speaking of tea, we're going to be spilling a little tea this morning on how you can recognize signs of burnout with your employees and what you need to do about it. So, as I mentioned, brilliant attorney at law, Michelle Russell, is joining us. She's all over social media. You must know her. She writes an article in the newspaper. She's on LinkedIn. She's everywhere. And now she's here on Morning Barbados. Hey, Michelle, good to have you with us.
Hi, good morning. Always good to be here.
And of course, you might be a little new to Morning Barbados, but not new to me.
Not at all.
From in the days of the mix.
Yes.
Yes, you used to contribute a lot with us. So very interesting topic, particularly as we move toward the end of 2024. And there are a lot of things happening right now in the country where we can, see that a lot of people are like, I just need a break. It's almost like everybody's waiting to make that collective sigh of, there's so much happening. So how do we work to recognize where our employees are experiencing burnout? Maybe you have to try to define it first of all.
Funny enough, you said as we move towards the end of the year, and I was thinking to myself, well, some of us are limping. We're barely dragging our feet, just hoping for December. And I think something some of us might not consciously recognize is that part of the reason we like December isn't just Christmas, we know there will be several days off work. We know it's the one time of the year we can justify not working as hard because the reality is people are in their merriment. The boss is less likely to be over you, requiring certain deliverables, and you just get to breathe, as you put it. So that burnout, the general definition for burnout is a state of mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion that tends to come on from either constant pressure or unrelenting stress. But it's not the same thing as stress. We have to make a distinction between stress and burnout because you can be stressed and not experience burnout. Stress is a state of having too much to do, too much pressure, too much deadlines, too much demands. Burnout is not having enough, not enough energy, not enough drive, not enough motivation. You feel dry, empty, you feel like you have nothing left to give. That's what burnout is, that level of I do not know how to keep going, which often sounds like depression, which is why burnout, a symptom of burnout, tends to be sadness or depression because you feel so empty. And who's going to be bouncing off the walls when they feel empty and struggling?
Yeah, so how do you identify it though? Because sometimes you can have so many different personalities in one workspace, it can be difficult to recognize, this could be burnout.
How do you recognize it? Awareness is important because the reality is sometimes in a managerial role or as employers, you are so focused on deliverables, year-end profits, and that kind of thing that you're not actually paying attention to the employee as a human. So you're saying to them, why did you miss this deadline? Or why can't you work this weekend? Or why are you giving me attitude? But you're not paying attention to them as a human, you're paying attention to the deliverable. So step one is awareness. Pay attention to your employees and when they begin to what I call act out. We often treat acting out as just an attitude problem. But if you have an employee who is normally a high achiever or an overachiever, who is normally self-driven, and all of a sudden they're demotivated, they're slower, they're probably watching the clock and leaving early, and probably giving you a bit of attitude when you're demanding more, that is often a sign that they've had enough. Because remember, burnout is not having enough, and so they're drained. That's a good sign. There tend to be physical symptoms as well, recurring headaches, changes in sleep patterns, digestive issues, and of course the emotional signs, sadness, irritability, mood swings, and the biggest, honestly, clue is demotivation. You don't want to go to work anymore. You don't want to be there. And one of the mistakes people make, and I remember one of my clients said to me once that he tells his employees, when you come through this door, leave your problems at home. And I said to him, while I understand what you're trying to achieve there, because the reality is we hire people to do work, not to come and, lay their problems in front of their colleagues, but we are whole persons. So whatever is happening in your life in general is going to affect work one way or the other. You can ask them to manage it, but not pretend, because burnout doesn't only come from work, you know. Burnout can come from the responsibilities at home. So like we could use an easy one with those employees who do study. They're doing their studies at the university or wherever, plus they are working. So that when they leave, they go straight to classes. Classes finish 9, 10. They stay up till 12, 1 o'clock doing assignments, and then they're back at work for 7. And they keep this up for months on end, they're going to burn out. So you cannot pretend that studying isn't going to affect how they show up at work. Their level of attention, concentration, productivity, creativity. If you're going through a divorce, you cannot expect the employee to show up in the same way as if everything is hunky-dory. If the child is sick, if a parent is sick, if there's grief, if there's loss, we are whole persons, and you carry over, and all of it will contribute to whether you experience burnout in the workplace and you show the signs. So pay attention to changes in behavior. Sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's big. And if we move away from this principal, school child attitude we tend to have in the workplace, where the moment there's a underperformance or a change in attitude, you want to discipline and rather engage, we will sooner notice the signs of burnout.
Yeah, so what do we do to be able to kind of move past it, or, you know, deal with it? Because you don't necessarily want to sidestep it. When I say move past it, to be able to more or less arrest it, tackle it to the ground.
I want to answer that in 2 ways, from the employer perspective and from the employee perspective. Let me start with the employee. As an employee, you need to make use of your vacation days. This whole carrying over of vacation, there is no price to you or your body. In fact, while we have the general definition of burnout, I have my personal definition for it, because it's something very dear to my heart, because I've suffered it several times. You'd think I'd learned by now, right? But I've gotten better. But I define burnout as when you become out of touch with your body and what it needs. So you're no longer paying attention to the fact that you're just drained. It's not that you're tired, why it is you don't want to go to work. It's that you are so overworked, you just don't even want to do this anymore. You're noticing the changes in sleep patterns, and rather than engaging in self-awareness and honesty with yourself, you're explaining it away. Oh, it was just one night. Or it's just this week. Oh, you know, it's the dog that was barking. You're explaining it away. You're out of touch with your body and what it needs. It needs rest. It needs exercise. It needs fun. It needs comfort. It needs engagement. All of these things. So step 1 is make use of your vacation days. Under the Holidays with Pay Act, it actually requires that an employer allow you to take your vacation within 6 months of its anniversary date. So this whole practice of employers asking you to defer because it's a busy period, that can only fly up to a point. At the 6-month mark, you have the right to say, no, I want to take my vacation now, and take your accrued days. You really don't get paid for accrued days unless you're terminated or unless it's provided within your contract that if you didn't take it, you get paid. But technically, that is even a breach of the legislation. The next thing is your sick days. Take your sick days. There is no price for turning up sick. First of all, you're less focused, less productive. You might even be contagious and then making the entire workplace sick.
Yep.
Take your sick days. The body needs it. When you don't, you prolong your illness and the body just doesn't ever fully recover. There's no price. The next thing is I like to talk about the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act. Under Section 7, it actually requires that an employer make reasonable adjustments for employees who fall within what are the protected characteristics, some of which include if you have a medical condition, maternity, family responsibility, disability. The employer has a duty when requested of the employee to make reasonable accommodations, which include allocating certain duties to another employee, altering your hours of work, sending you to training if necessary. In other words, taking off some of that load that can lead to the burnout. So as employees, you have a duty to take care of yourself. You know, the employer is not going to do it for you, except if you're in one of those the smaller companies where they tend to be more intimate and caring. But reality is the employment relationship is a contractual one. It's not one of companionship and care. All right, I'm paying you to give the service and you are giving the service for payment. We're not here to look out for each other, except as is necessary for you to provide the services, right? Now, as the employer, empathy. I cannot stress this enough. We live in a world where we become so isolated. I don't know if you read the story about the employee who was dead at work for 3 days.
I did.
3 days and nobody noticed. And that in itself is indicative of this lack of empathy where we focus so much on ourselves only.
But for me, Michelle, that's a little contradictory when we talk about, this is a contractual arrangement. You're here to get the job done, and then still ask employers to give empathy and consider employees who might be suffering burnout. So where do we find that middle ground where, they recognize this is what I need to do to be able to get this job done, and still maybe be empathetic and all of the other things we're asking for, without seeming as though, this is just contractual and I really care nothing about you. It really is about finding a middle ground, I think.
But you answered it. You said, this is what I need to do to get the job done. And when we begin to realize that we're humans and not computers, you realize what humans need to be motivated and to be productive. There are tons of studies that say a happy employee is a productive employee. When an employee feels seen, heard, engaged, an employee is more likely to show up for you and go over and beyond. Those are the words that the ones that get in the 30-year service awards. Those are the ones that get in the employee of the year, because they feel engaged. They feel like they're an integral part of the institution because they feel that you care in some way. Now, I'm not telling you to turn up at their children's graduation and necessarily hold them when they're crying, but when you see them having a rough day, you might say take the afternoon off.
Yeah, I find in other places, some employers have been moving to institute working from home days. So particularly employees with young children. It's a different space when you're operating in some other larger countries and first world, what we deem first world countries, where, there are a lot of services in the workplace. So you don't have to worry about rushing out in that kind of traffic to pick up the children. You don't have to worry about rushing out to go to daycare. So all of those are things that can really put pressure on your employees, particularly when you're kind of watching the clock. I think that's the thing for a lot of employers. They're like, you went out for 2 hours for lunch today. When are we going to get this done? So I think it's about maybe moving to a type of thinking, particularly in businesses where you allow people to deliver on deadlines and not necessarily hold them to sitting behind a desk. That's where we see things like presenteeism and all that coming into play. Michelle, you always leave us in a position where we're thinking about what next we can do, and that's what these discussions are all about. So thanks for coming.
Always a pleasure.
All right. So you can find Michelle wherever internet is found. And she's not shy in sharing her opinions, and she is very open in sharing with your questions as well. So you definitely can reach out to her.
Morning, morning, morning.